if you finally had enough of this.
Oh, said it wasn't a good investment. Please don't give me any of that. We just heard the words. Everybody in the White House, they know that. Why? They're radicals.
Time for Countdown's number 2 story, tonight's worst persons in the world, brought to you by Fix News, which today saw Geico and Sargento Cheese join the advertiser boycott of Glenn Lonesome Rhodes Beck.
And
why
Rush
don't
Limbaugh has high negatives
why don't people like Rush Limbaugh?
Because he's abrasive, he's divisive, he's a fat pill-popping idiot. I mean, he's completely, abrasive to.
This president, I think, has exposed himself as a guy over and over and over again who has a deep-seated hatred for white people or the white culture. I don't know what it is.
Then you're ready for this.
We invite figures from the several disciplines of public affairs to discuss and debate from their unique perspectives current issues of government and politics, and we provide them with an opportunity to persuade you by the power of their reasoning rather than by the volume of their rhetoric of the correctness of their positions.
Professor Roosevelt, my next question will start with you. How would your ideal justice vote on the constitutionality of a state law defining marriage as a legal union between a man and a woman, prohibiting the licensing within its borders of civil unions between people of the same gender, and declining to recognize the legality of such unions consummated elsewhere?
Well, to take the last part of that first, with respect to the no recognition of same-sex unions consummated elsewhere, unless you think there is a right to same-sex marriage under the federal Constitution, that one's pretty easy. If it's permissible for a state to say, we don't recognize same-sex marriages celebrated within our borders, they can also say we don't recognize same-sex marriages celebrated elsewhere. So the no recognition point, it really depends on the other question. If the state must recognize same-sex marriages within its borders, then of course it has to recognize same-sex marriages from other states. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So move on to the main question. Should there be a federal constitutional right to same-sex marriage? I would view this as an equal protection question, or my ideal justice would view this as an equal protection question. And my ideal justice would view the equal protection clause as generally forbidding unjustified discrimination, discrimination without an adequate reason. So the question is going to be, what sort of interests can the state put forward here? And it's a difficult question because we're in the middle of a period of social change. We have a social movement struggling for equality on behalf of gays and lesbians, and it's been a quite successful social movement. And the result of that is that things that looked like good justifications don't look so good anymore. Appeals to common sense or decency or morality used to be widely enough shared that people would say, yes, of course, same-sex marriage, that's ridiculous. People don't think that way anymore. We're seeing increasing acceptance of same-sex unions. I don't think that we've gone far enough, though. I think that a justice deciding a difficult equal protection case like this is going to be guided by some understanding of national consensus, some understanding of what the will of the people as a whole is, and I don't think we're there yet on same-sex marriage. My ideal justice would probably not want to hear this case right now, but if he did have to hear it, he would vote against a right to same-sex marriage under the federal Constitution.
Thank you. Mr. Levey, how would your ideal justice vote on the constitutionality of such a state law?
Well, my ideal justice would not, probably not use the conclusory term discrimination, because after all, every decision we make in life involves discrimination. So to say that you can't do something because it's discrimination is, again, is to beg the question. If you hire somebody because they're more skilled than another person, is that discrimination? Yes, it is. So really, it comes down to who gets to choose what criteria we cannot differentiate among. We certainly know from the 14th Amendment that we cannot irrationally differentiate between people based on race. should sexual orientation come into play here? Again, I think that given that the 14th Amendment and its framers had race in mind, who else it applies to should really be a democratic process. And I think that's the key here. Professor Roosevelt talks about social progress, but social progress shouldn't take place through the will of 9 unelected people on the Supreme Court. It should take place through the democratic process, whether that's through Congress, whether that's through state legislatures, whether that's through ballot initiatives, or whether it's through the amendment process. And most of the great advances in civil rights have come through the amendment process. But you know, it's funny, it's been almost 40 years now since we've had a substantive constitutional amendment, and that's for a good reason, because those who believe in, let's say, a living constitution have learned that it's a lot quicker to go through the courts. You don't have to win over the support of the American people. And I think that gay marriage is a great example. If you look at all the states where it was on the ballot, all but one voted to ban gay marriage, including California, including the very socially liberal state of California. And virtually every state that has legislated gay marriage has done it because courts ordered them to, not because the democratic process did it on its own. So not only are we not at the point of a national consensus on it, the democratic process has told us the American people do not support gay marriage. There may very well come a time when they do, and at that point it should be done democratically. But for the court, an elitist court, to impose that on the American people and say our values are better than your values, I simply think that's indefensible, and my ideal justice would also think that's indefensible.
Thank you.